as if tragedy and sadness were simply limited to this story. Another week, another mass shooting or two. 8 people in Atlanta, 10 people in Boulder. You and I read the papers in shock, say our prayers, wishing things were better, and then nothing happens. We like to blame the gun lobby. We like to blame our politicians and our gun-loving American culture. But we also suspect that just like in our Palm Sunday story, we share some of the blame. An editorial writer astutely put it this way: the main reason that members of Congress feel comfortable blocking gun safety measures is because most Americans don't feel strongly enough about the issue to change their votes. If Americans stopped voting for opponents of these measures, gun safety laws would pass very quickly. And while this stagnation may be the case for most Americans, my brothers and sisters, in the shadow of this very sad story, and in the shadow of the hopelessness many of us see out in our culture, this is not the case for you and me. For Christians, we believe things can change, and we are charged with bringing about positive change. We believe things can get better, and we see hope as integral to our work toward a more just, safe, and peaceful world. That's why we can't stay silent about gun safety or any other devastating social problem. Change always begins with hope. And if you came into this church today, if you came into this most blessed of Holy Weeks feeling hopeless and suspecting that the culture's overriding atmosphere of apathy and indifference, fear and impotency can possibly win the day, we are running headlong into the core of what it means to follow Jesus, the dream of a better world, the possibility of change that is illustrated no more clearly than in the gospel story that we just heard. You and I may be feeling hopeless about a lot of things this morning, certainly about gun safety, about our political divide, about our racial inequities, about a return to any kind of post-COVID normalcy. Maybe you came here feeling particularly hopeless about a health challenge, a financial challenge, problems in a relationship. If we are feeling hopeless, Palm Sunday is for us. And hope is not some saccharine-infused, make-believe snake oil that preachers pull out and use as a Band-Aid over a broken leg. No, let us remind ourselves that hope is real. Hope is a force. Hope is the fuel for any kind of change. Several years ago, a young black woman named Sheila Washington was cleaning out a room in her house when she found a dusty old paperback. She was just 17 years old, cleaning out a corner of the house that hadn't been touched in a while. And she came across the story of the Scottsboro Boys. Anybody remember that story? Of the Scottsboro Boys. It was 1970s when she was doing this cleaning, and this tattered book she found talked about that famous encounter in Scottsboro, Alabama, a few decades before, when a couple of white women on a train, in order to get police off their backs, pointed to 9 black men, ages 17 to 25, and accused them of rape. Given the time and the place, all of them were quickly convicted by an all-white jury, and all but one of them were given the death penalty. Well, eventually, justice would surface, and all of them would be released, but not after serving several years in prison. Well, reading about that egregious injustice, Sheila Washington, 17-year-old Sheila Washington, wondered why she had never heard of this story. After all, she lived in Scottsboro, Alabama. So Sheila Washington vowed to keep the story alive. She decided the best way to do that would be to enshrine that story in a museum. But Sheila didn't have any money. She didn't have any connections. She didn't have any expertise into how somebody might go about doing something like that. But she did have the one thing that mattered. She had hope. Yes, it took years. It actually took decades. First, to get the Scottsboro boys declared innocent and their names cleared. But then to get the museum. It took persistence to interest politicians and the people of the town to get behind the idea. Yes, there was a lot of pushback. At one point, the white mayor simply told her to simply cool it and wait for another generation to pass by. But Sheila would have none of that. She would keep lobbying and keep talking to anybody who would listen about her dream and her hope of keeping that story alive. So today, if y'all go down to Scottsboro, Alabama, you can see her museum. It's in a converted church, and while Sheila died just last month, her work lives on. And it's not just a work to tell of the shameful injustices of a bygone era, nor is it just a living reminder of current injustice that still needs addressing. No, it is also a monument to hope. Sheila Washington overcame the same kind of obstacles, the same kind of resistance that you and I are facing right now. Hope is the spark needed to light the fires of change. Hope is the spark needed to light the fires of change. God is in the business of righting a world that's listing pretty badly. And God has made a world in which human agency, the works of our hands, the actions that we take, can bring about the change that's needed. The only guarantee for failure is losing hope. If we don't give up, my brothers and sisters, we've got a chance. What are you hoping for this morning? Where are your hopes? This story says something about that. After all, if our sober assessment of the situation is that it's hopeless, that we're ill-prepared, that we're ill-equipped, and utterly incapable, well, congratulations. These are the only people God seems interested in using. Do we need to be reminded of the cowardice of Peter? How many denials? 2 denials after 3 cock crows this morning? The abandonment of both James and John, the fickle, self-serving lack of bravery shown by the other 9 disciples, not to mention Jesus' own family. Do we need to see the darkness descend upon Calvary and the cross? Do we need to hear the mockery of the passers-by? Or witness the abject disappointment and grief of the women mourning at the foot of the cross? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And yet it is from that mire of hopelessness that God would do something. That God would do something amazing. These very people, those who had lost all hope, would one day become important foundation stones in the building of the greatest movement the world has ever known. A movement that would bring healing and peace and love into the world in an unprecedented fashion and scale. From hopelessness, look what happened. From your hopelessness, imagine what can happen. Today, my friends, we do see that picture of utter hopelessness. A lot of us are scared. We have real doubts about any sort of rescue. We know what it's like to see much needed change passed over. How long, cries the psalmist, how long? Yet somewhere inside of us, we know that this is not the end of the story. We know that the God we serve is not bound by death, but destined to conquer it. And so what if we approached our stories like this? Instead of looking at the time we're spending in the valley of the shadow of death in the utter hopelessness of the various failed missions of our lives, what if we looked at this time through the eyes of faith, not as one of anticlimax, but one of anticipation? What if we expected that God might do something? In other words, what if we could take this time we have stewing in the smelly mire of missed opportunities and dashed dreams, and instead view it as a time of expectation and anticipation for what God is working out for the road ahead? Maybe this is what having faith looks like. Maybe that's what Jesus was trying to summon up as he hung there on the cross. Ever wonder what was going through his mind? Let's not suggest that all of our pain and our mourning be dismissed or discounted as invalid. It's not. Rather, that somewhere in the back of our minds, you and I might keep alive that small flame that is flickering and suggesting to you and me that the game is not over yet. That God is somehow with us. And that no matter how things end, we are loved, we are enveloped in love, and we are destined to eternity to be surrounded by love. The ending of Palm Sunday is one of despair and sadness for its main players. But for you and me who sit on the other side of Easter, I guess I can say that word even though it's not until next week. You and I know there is more to the story. And no matter where we are on our journeys today, how hopeless our predicaments, how sad the outlook, how scary the road ahead might be for us, let us cling to our hope that the same divine faithfulness that we see in this story will also be present in our own. My brothers and sisters, the tomb was sealed, but we suspect that that may not always be the case. Amen.